The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, which I found grimly appropriate since Tuesdays had always struck me as the universe's way of saying that Mondays weren't quite punishment enough. I was 74 years old, had just finished my morning workout, a combination of resistance training and cardio that would have impressed my physician if she weren't so busy being shocked that someone my age still had a physician rather than a full-time medical team. And I was drinking my protein shake when my daughter-in-law Vanessa knocked on my door with that particular expression that said she was about to ruin my day while insisting it was for my own good. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The letter, it turned out, was from an attorney. Not my attorney, mind you, but one my son Derek had apparently retained on my behalf without bothering to mention it during our weekly phone calls. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the message was crystal clear. My family had begun proceedings to establish a conservatorship over my financial affairs. For my own protection, naturally. Because at 74, despite running a successful investment portfolio that had tripled in value over the past decade, despite managing 3 rental properties that generated consistent income, despite being sharper with numbers than most people half my age, I was apparently too frail to be trusted with my own money. I read the letter twice, then set it down on my kitchen counter with the kind of controlled precision that comes from decades of not allowing emotions to dictate actions. Vanessa was still standing in my doorway, her designer handbag clutched against her body like a shield, her expression hovering somewhere between pity and determination. She was wearing what I'd come to think of as her intervention outfit, a tasteful pantsuit that said serious professional woman who knows what's best. I'd seen that outfit before, usually right before she suggested I consider assisted living facilities with their wonderful activities coordinators and chef-prepared meals. Diane, she began, using the gentle voice people reserve for children and the elderly, 2 groups they've decided are essentially the same. I know this seems sudden, but Derek and I have been worried for months. You're living alone in this big house, managing all these complicated financial matters, and what if something happens? What if you fall or forget to pay a bill, or make a mistake with your investments? I took another sip of my protein shake, 30 grams of whey isolate blended with almond milk, spinach, and a banana. The same shake I'd been making every morning for the past 5 years as part of the nutritional plan that had helped me maintain muscle mass and bone density that my doctor said was remarkable for someone my age. Remarkable, as if aging automatically meant deterioration, as if taking care of oneself was some kind of biological anomaly once you pass 70. I haven't fallen, I said calmly. I haven't forgotten to pay a bill in 50 years. And my investment portfolio is outperforming the market average by 4%. But please do go on about these mistakes I'm supposedly making. Vanessa's expression tightened slightly. She'd expected tears, perhaps, or confusion, or that particular elderly helplessness that would confirm all her assumptions. What she hadn't expected was the same cool analytical response I'd been giving to presumptuous financial advisors and condescending bankers for the past 40 years, back when being a woman in finance was considered even more implausible than being a competent elderly person apparently still was. It's not about mistakes you've made, she said, adjusting her strategy with the fluidity of someone used to difficult negotiations. It's about preventing future problems. Derek and I just want to help. We've found a wonderful financial management firm that specializes in elder care. They'll handle everything, make sure your bills are paid, your investments are safe, your properties are maintained. You won't have to worry about anything. There it was. The phrase that had been creeping into more and more conversations with my son and his wife over the past year. You won't have to worry about anything. As if worry itself, rather than legitimate concern about specific issues, was the problem. As if the goal of my remaining years should be the elimination of all mental engagement, all challenge, all purpose beyond existing comfortably until I had the courtesy to die without causing too much inconvenience. And who exactly would be making the decisions about my money? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Well, Derek would be the primary conservator, of course. He's your son, and he has your best interests at heart. The management firm would handle the day-to-day operations, but all major decisions would go through him. Vanessa smiled as if she just offered me a tremendous gift. You'd still have an allowance, naturally. Enough for groceries and personal expenses. But the complicated stuff, the investments and property management and tax planning, That would all be taken care of for you. An allowance. At 74, after building a financial independence that had sustained me through widowhood, through economic recessions, through the countless obstacles that came with being a woman managing money in a world that assumed women and finance were fundamentally incompatible, I was being offered an allowance like a child who needed supervision to avoid spending her lunch money on candy. I should mention that my house, the one Vanessa kept referring to as too big for me to manage alone, was a 3-bedroom Craftsman in Portland that I'd purchased 30 years ago for $80,000 and that was now worth just over $1 million. I should also mention that Derek and Vanessa had been house hunting in my neighborhood for the past 6 months, attending open houses and lamenting the ridiculous prices to anyone who would listen. Funny how my supposedly unmanageable house was located in exactly the neighborhood they desperately wanted to live in. I see, I said, setting down my now empty glass. And when exactly were you planning to discuss this with me before involving attorneys? We tried, Vanessa protested. We've been dropping hints for months. The comments about how stressful it must be to manage everything alone, the suggestions about simplifying your life, the offers to help with your finances. But you kept insisting you were fine, that you had everything under control. She made it sound like my competence was a form of denial. Perhaps because I am fine and I do have everything under control, I suggested. My last cognitive assessment, which I took voluntarily 6 months ago, because I believe in preventive health care, showed no signs of decline. My physician confirmed I'm in excellent health for my age. My financial records are immaculate. So I'm curious what evidence you're presenting to support this conservatorship. The flicker of discomfort that crossed Vanessa's face told me everything I needed to know. There was no evidence. There was only the assumption that being 74 automatically equaled incapacity, combined with the convenient fact that Derek stood to benefit substantially from controlling my assets. The rental properties alone generated $40,000 annually in net income. My investment portfolio was worth just over $2 million. And my house, my supposedly burdensome house, was prime real estate in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods. The attorney said we have a strong case, Vanessa said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Elder financial abuse is a serious problem. People your age are vulnerable to scams, to making poor decisions, to being taken advantage of. We're protecting you. From whom, I wondered? From the scammers and con artists they'd invented to justify their interference, or from myself, from the autonomy they found so threatening in someone who was supposed to be declining gracefully into dependence. I'd built my entire adult life around financial independence, around never having to rely on anyone else for security or survival. I taught myself investing when women weren't supposed to understand such things. I'd navigated the financial industry when being taken seriously meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. And now my own son and his wife, who'd come to me for a down payment on their first house, who'd borrowed money during Derek's MBA program, who'd asked my advice on their own investments more times than I could count, had decided I was too frail to manage my own affairs. I'll be contesting this, I said simply, every step of the way. And I should warn you that my memory is excellent, so when we're in court, I'll be happy to discuss the $30,000 I loaned you for Derek's education, the $50,000 I gifted you for your house down payment, and the numerous times you've sought my financial advice, all of which suggest you found my judgment quite sound when it benefited you. Vanessa's face flushed. That's not fair. We're grateful for everything you've done. This isn't about the money. Isn't it? I asked, allowing a hint of steel into my voice. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like it's about the money. My money specifically, and your desire to control it. She stood abruptly, her handbag swinging against her hip with enough force to suggest genuine anger beneath the concerned daughter-in-law performance. We're trying to help you, Diane. I'm sorry you can't see that. But whether you fight this or not, we're moving forward. Derek and I have made our decision. After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long moment, looking at the certified letter that represented my son's attempt to strip away my autonomy. The house was quiet around me, the kind of silence that had become familiar over the 15 years since my husband Paul had died, leaving me to navigate late life alone. Except I'd never felt alone, not really. I had my routines, my investments to monitor, my properties to manage, my gym sessions 3 times a week, my volunteer work at the Financial Literacy Center teaching young women the money skills I'd had to learn the hard way. I had a life that was full and purposeful and entirely mine. But Derek and Vanessa had looked at that same life and seen only vulnerability, only risk, only an elderly woman who needed to be managed before she became a burden or worse, before she squandered the inheritance they'd apparently already started counting on. The presumption of it was breathtaking. The betrayal of it, from my own son, cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I picked up my phone to call my attorney Linda Chun, who'd handled my estate planning and various property transactions over the years. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and efficient as always. I explained the situation in clear, unemotional terms, the same way I'd learned to present information in boardrooms full of men who were looking for any excuse to dismiss me. "They don't have a case," Linda said immediately after I'd finished. "Not based on what you're telling me. You're cognitively sound, financially solvent."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"And managing your affairs competently. A court isn't going to strip your autonomy just because your son thinks you're too old to handle money. But I have to warn you, Diane, these proceedings can be ugly. Family conservatorship cases often are. Are you prepared for that?" "I don't have a choice," I replied. "If I don't fight this, I lose everything I've built. Not just the money, but my independence, my purpose, my dignity. What kind of life is that?" "A common one, unfortunately," Linda said with audible frustration. "I see this more than you'd think. Adult children who convince themselves they're acting in their parents' best interests, while conveniently positioning themselves to benefit financially. The language is always about protection and care, but the result is the same. Infantilization, loss of autonomy, and often, yes, financial exploitation even if they don't see it that way themselves." We scheduled a meeting for later that week to discuss strategy. After I hung up, I did what I always did when processing difficult information. I went to my home gym, the converted spare bedroom where I kept my weight bench, resistance bands, dumbbells, and the rowing machine I'd purchased last year. Exercise had become my meditation over the past decade. The place where I worked through problems while working my body, where I proved to myself daily that age was not the enemy my culture insisted it was. I loaded the barbell for bench press, warming up with just the bar before adding weight in careful increments. 135, 150, 165. Nothing impressive by young athlete standards, but respectable for a 74-year-old woman, especially one who'd started strength training at 65 after reading about the importance of maintaining muscle mass for healthy aging. Each rep was an act of defiance against every assumption about what bodies like mine were supposed to be capable of. Each session was proof that decline was not inevitable, that strength could be built and maintained even in the later decades of life, that Frail was a choice, not a destiny. As I pushed the weight up, feeling my muscles engage, my core stabilize, my breath find its rhythm, I thought about the irony of my situation. Here I was, literally bench pressing weight that most people my age couldn't lift, while my family decided I was too frail to manage my own bank account. Here I was, maintaining a portfolio that outperformed professional fund managers, while being told I needed protection from my own financial decisions. The disconnect was so absurd it would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. By the time I finished my workout, I'd made a decision. I would fight the conservatorship with every resource at my disposal. I would document my competence so thoroughly that no court could justify stripping my rights. And I would make sure Derek and Vanessa understood exactly what they were doing, not with anger or recrimination, but with the kind of clear-eyed assessment I'd bring to any bad investment. They were betting against me, gambling that I was weaker than I actually was. It was a bet they were going to lose. What I didn't know, as I showered and dressed for the rest of my day, was that my son had already implemented the next phase of his plan. The phone call came that evening, just as I was reviewing the quarterly reports from my property management company. The caller identified himself as Marcus Webb from Senior Living Solutions, calling on behalf of my family who'd expressed concern about my living situation. "I'm not interested," I said immediately, recognizing the script. "My family doesn't speak for me, and I'm perfectly capable of managing my own living arrangements." "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus replied with professional smoothness. "I completely understand. But if I could just take a moment to tell you about our services. We specialize in helping seniors transition to more appropriate living situations. Your son mentioned you have a lovely home that's become difficult to maintain, and we have some wonderful options that would simplify your life considerably. Appropriate living situations. The euphemisms were piling up. First, I was too frail to live alone. Now my home was too difficult to maintain. Next would come the suggestions that I was becoming a danger to myself, that my family was worried, that professionals agreed I needed more support. It was a script I'd seen played out with other women my age, a slow erosion of autonomy disguised as concern until suddenly you found yourself in an assisted living facility you'd never agreed to, surrounded by activities coordinators and medication schedules and the presumption that your life was essentially over except for the waiting. My home is not difficult to maintain, I said coldly. I have a cleaning service, a lawn care company, and a handyman on call for any repairs. My house is in excellent condition, as is my ability to manage it. Please remove me from your call list and inform my son that any future decisions about my living situation will be made by me alone. I hung up before he could respond, but the call left me unsettled. Derek was escalating. The conservatorship filing, the home transition company, what would be next? An unexpected visit from Adult Protective Services, perhaps, with anonymous concerns about an elderly woman living alone? A well-meaning neighbor suddenly reporting I seemed confused or neglected. I'd heard stories from the Financial Literacy Center about how these situations spiraled, how families could weaponize the very systems designed to protect vulnerable elders against anyone they decided was too old to make their own choices. The next morning I received an email from Derek. Not a phone call, I noticed. Not a face-to-face conversation. An email, as if reducing this betrayal to electronic communication made it somehow more palatable. Mom, I know you're upset about the conservatorship, but please try to understand. Vanessa and I are worried about you. You're alone in that big house, managing all these complicated financial matters, and we just want to make sure you're protected. I know you think you're fine, but sometimes people don't realize when they're struggling. We've noticed you seem more forgetful lately, more isolated. We just want what's best for you. Please don't fight this. Let us help you. Love, Derek. The manipulative psychology of it was almost impressive. I seemed more forgetful, more isolated. Vague claims that could mean anything or nothing, impossible to disprove because they were based entirely on subjective interpretation. I couldn't prove I wasn't seeming more forgetful to them, any more than I could prove I wasn't seeming more isolated. The accusations were designed to be unfalsifiable, to plant doubt about my own perceptions, to suggest that my insistence on my own competence was itself evidence of decline. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted into further evidence of my supposed inability to accept reality. Instead, I forwarded the email to Linda with a brief note. More documentation of their campaign. Note the vague accusations designed to undermine my credibility. Linda's response was swift. Good instinct not to engage. Let me handle all communication from here on. In the meantime, I'd like you to do something that might seem unusual. I want you to start documenting your daily activities. Keep a detailed log of everything you do, every financial transaction, every property management decision, every workout, every social engagement. Create a record that demonstrates competence and engagement with life. If this goes to court, we'll need to counter their narrative with concrete evidence. So I began keeping a log. It felt absurd at first, like having to prove I was living my own life, but I understood the strategic necessity. Each morning I documented my routine. 5:30 wake up, protein shake preparation with specific measurements, workout routine with weights and repetitions, shower and preparation for the day. Then the business activities, checking stock prices and making any necessary portfolio adjustments, reviewing rental property reports, responding to emails from tenants or my property manager, paying bills online with documented confirmation numbers. Then the personal activities, grocery shopping with itemized receipts, volunteer work at the Financial Literacy Center with sign-in sheets and program materials, coffee with friends with photos and credit card receipts showing the date and location. It was exhausting, this constant documentation of normalcy, this burden of proof that shouldn't have been necessary. But more than that, it was infuriating. I was being forced to justify my existence, to demonstrate that my life had value and purpose and coherence, not because I'd done anything wrong but simply because I'd had the audacity to continue living competently past the age when society decided competence was implausible. 2 weeks after receiving the conservatorship letter, Another development arrived. This time it was a phone call from Derek himself, his voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured patience that suggested he was doing me an enormous favor by even speaking to me. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Vanessa's father has run into some temporary difficulties. His retirement community is dealing with some health code issues and residents are being temporarily relocated while repairs are made. He needs a place to stay for a few weeks, maybe a month. Vanessa and I thought it would be perfect if he stayed with you." I was silent for a moment, processing this latest manipulation. Perfect for whom? I finally asked. "For everyone," Derek said with forced cheerfulness. "You've been alone too much. Having some company would be good for you. And Raymond is a great guy. You'll enjoy getting to know him." Raymond, Vanessa's father. The man I'd met exactly twice, both times at family gatherings where he'd spent most of the time holding forth about his career as a financial consultant, offering unsolicited advice about investment strategies I should consider, mansplaining concepts I'd been implementing successfully for decades. He was 78, recently widowed, and from what I'd gathered during those brief encounters, possessed the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned, the kind of man who assumed his opinions were facts and his preferences were universal truths. "Absolutely not," I said. "I'm not running a boarding house for displaced relatives. Raymond can stay in a hotel or with you and Vanessa." "We don't have room," Derek protested. "Our house is too small, and hotels are expensive for an extended stay. You have 3 bedrooms. It's the obvious solution." "The obvious solution to a problem that isn't mine," I countered. "I didn't agree to house guests. I don't want house guests. And I suspect this convenient timing, right in the middle of your conservatorship proceedings, is not actually coincidental." "I don't know what you're talking about," Derek said, but his tone had shifted, becoming defensive. "This is just a temporary housing issue. It has nothing to do with the other situation." "Doesn't it?" I asked. "It wouldn't have anything to do with establishing a narrative that I'm not really living alone, that I'm accepting help, that maybe I do need oversight after all? Or perhaps gathering evidence that I'm difficult, unreasonable, unwilling to help family members in need?" The silence on the other end confirmed my suspicion. This was another move in their campaign, another attempt to destabilize my position. If I agreed, Raymond would be reporting back to Derek and Vanessa about every aspect of my daily life, interpreting everything through the lens of elderly incompetence they'd already decided defined me. If I refused, I was the unreasonable mother, the difficult elderly woman who wouldn't even help family in a minor crisis. "I'm sorry Raymond is dealing with housing issues," I said carefully. "But my answer is no. I'm sure he'll find suitable arrangements." "Fine," Derek said, his voice tight with anger. "I'll let Vanessa know her father isn't welcome in your home. I'm sure she'll appreciate knowing how you really feel about her family." He hung up before I could respond, but I sat holding the phone for a long moment afterward, feeling the weight of how thoroughly my relationship with my son had deteriorated. When had I become the adversary instead of his mother? When had my competence become threatening instead of something to respect? Or had it always been this way, buried under years of pleasant interactions that never challenged his assumptions about his eventual inheritance, his future control, his right to make decisions about my life once he'd decided I'd lived long enough on my own terms? That evening, I met my friend Elena for dinner at the Italian restaurant we'd been frequenting for years. Elena was 76, a retired architect who designed commercial buildings all over the Pacific Northwest, and now spent her time consulting on sustainable design projects and teaching occasional seminars at the university. We'd met at the gym 5 years ago, both of us anomalies in the weight room, and had bonded over our shared frustration with how invisible competent older women seemed to be in every space we occupied. I told her about the conservatorship, about Derek and Vanessa's campaign, about the housing request that was clearly another manipulation. Elena listened with growing anger, her dark eyes flashing with recognition and fury. "It's happening to my friend Patricia," she said when I'd finished. "Her daughter got power of attorney, moved her into assisted living, and is now selling Patricia's house. Patricia is sharp as ever, perfectly capable, but her daughter convinced everyone she needed supervision. Now she's trapped in this facility, watching her independence disappear while her daughter liquidates her assets, All perfectly legal because Patricia signed documents she didn't fully understand. How do we fight this? I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice. How do we prove we're competent when the burden of proof is on us, and the standards are completely subjective? Elena was quiet for a moment, twirling pasta on her fork with deliberate precision. We document everything. We stay visible. We make sure our competence is so undeniable that even the people determined to see decline can't ignore reality. And maybe, she paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully, maybe we play their game better than they do. What do you mean? They're expecting you to be defensive, angry, to fight directly. What if instead you gave them exactly what they think they want but on your terms? What if you accepted this housing request, but turned it into such an obvious demonstration of your competence that they couldn't possibly use it against you? I stared at her. You think I should let Raymond stay with me? I think you should turn their manipulation back on them, Elena said. Let Raymond come, but make it clear from day one that you're in charge. Document everything. Show that you're not just capable of managing your own household, but of accommodating additional people while maintaining all your other responsibilities. Make it impossible for them to argue you need oversight. The idea was both appealing and terrifying. Inviting my adversary's father into my home seemed like strategic suicide. But Elena had a point. If I could demonstrate that I could handle the added complexity of a house guest while continuing to manage everything else, it would undermine Derek and Vanessa's narrative of a fragile woman overwhelmed by daily life. And if Raymond reported back that I was managing beautifully, it would complicate their case considerably. You're suggesting I weaponize hospitality, I said slowly. I'm suggesting you control the narrative before they do, Elena corrected. Right now they're painting you as isolated and declining. Show them you're neither. Be so obviously competent that even Raymond can't ignore it. I thought about it through the rest of dinner, weighing the risks against the potential strategic advantage. By the time Elena and I parted ways, I'd made a decision that would either prove my competence beyond question, or give my son exactly the ammunition he needed to take everything away. I called Derek that night. I've reconsidered, I said when he answered. Raymond can stay here. But there will be ground rules, and he'll need to respect that this is my home and I'm doing him a favor, not the other way around. The surprise in Derek's voice was palpable. Really? That's great, Mom. I'll let Vanessa know. Raymond can probably move in this weekend. This weekend is fine, I agreed. Have him call me first to discuss arrangements. And Derek? I meant what I said about ground rules. This is my house. I'm in charge. Make sure Raymond understands that. After hanging up, I sat in my living room, looking at the space I'd created over decades of living, the books and art and furniture that reflected my choices, my taste, my life. In 3 days, I'd be sharing this space with a virtual stranger, a man who represented everything I was fighting against, patriarchal assumptions about who got to make decisions and whose competence required constant proof. But I'd made my choice. Raymond was coming, and I was going to make absolutely certain that when he left, there would be no question about who was capable of managing whom. Raymond Castellano arrived on Saturday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, which I appreciated despite my misgivings about everything else. Punctuality suggested respect for other people's time, a quality I valued even in people I suspected had ulterior motives. He emerged from a sleek silver sedan driven by Vanessa, carrying 2 expensive leather suitcases and wearing what I recognized as the uniform of recently retired professionals trying to maintain their sense of importance. Pressed khakis, a polo shirt with a subtle logo, and loafers that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Vanessa had that bright, brittle smile she wore when she thought she was winning. Hi Diane, she chirped, helping Raymond with his bags. Thank you so much for doing this. Raymond is really grateful for your hospitality. Raymond extended his hand with the firm grip of someone who'd spent decades in business meetings where handshakes were opportunities for dominance displays. Diane, pleasure to see you again. I appreciate you opening your home. This retirement community situation is a real inconvenience. Apparently some issue with the ventilation system, mold concerns, bunch of bureaucratic nonsense if you ask me. I shook his hand and stepped back to let them enter. The guest room is upstairs, second door on the left. Bathroom is across the hall. Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 7. I keep a fairly structured schedule, which I'll share with you so we can coordinate use of common spaces. I work from my home office most mornings, so I'll need quiet during those hours. Raymond's eyebrows lifted slightly at my directness, but he nodded. Of course. I'm not here to disrupt your routine. I'll stay out of your way. After Vanessa left with promises to check in regularly and reminders to Raymond to call if he needed anything, I showed him to his room and gave him a brief tour of the house. I kept my explanations efficient and matter-of-fact, establishing from the first moments that this was my space, my rules, and that his presence here was temporary accommodation, not some kind of trial living arrangement or stealth supervision opportunity. I need to be clear about something, I said as we stood in the kitchen after the tour. I know why Derek and Vanessa really asked you to stay here. This isn't just about your housing situation. They're trying to build a case that I need oversight, and I suspect they're hoping you'll provide evidence to support that. I'm telling you directly that I won't tolerate being monitored or reported on in my own home. If you're not comfortable with that, we should end this arrangement right now. Raymond studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He was a tall man, probably 6'1", with silver hair still thick enough to suggest good genetics and a face that had probably been considered handsome in his younger years. His eyes were shrewd, assessing, the eyes of someone used to evaluating situations and people for advantage. That's quite an accusation, he said finally. What makes you think I'd be part of some conspiracy against you? Because your daughter is married to my son, and they're the ones pursuing a conservatorship over my finances, I replied evenly. Because this housing crisis happened at a remarkably convenient moment. And because I've been around long enough to recognize strategic manipulation when I see it. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply making sure we both understand the situation clearly. A slow smile spread across Raymond's face, surprising me. You know what? I appreciate the honesty. Most people would dance around it, pretend everything was about hospitality and family obligation. You're right that Vanessa asked me to pay attention, to let her know if I noticed anything concerning. But she's my daughter, and I love her, so I didn't think too hard about what she was really asking me to do. And now? I asked, curious despite myself. Now I'm wondering what kind of woman makes her own son so threatened that he'd try to take away her autonomy, Raymond said, leaning against the kitchen counter with casual ease. That's not normal family concern. That's something else. So here's my counteroffer. I'll stay, I'll be a respectful guest. And I'll make my own observations about whether you need any kind of oversight. But I'll base those observations on what I actually see, not on what Vanessa wants me to see. Fair enough? It wasn't ideal, but it was honest, which was more than I'd expected. Fair enough, I agreed. And since we're being honest, I should tell you that I'm documenting everything as part of my legal defense. That means there will be detailed records of household management, financial transactions, daily activities. If you're going to be here, you'll be part of that documentation. Understood, Raymond nodded. For what it's worth, I think it's smart. Legal cases are won on evidence, not assumptions. He glanced around the kitchen, taking in the organized countertops, the small desk area where I kept my household management binder, the calendar on the wall with color-coded activities. You run a tight ship here. I prefer organized to chaotic, I said simply. Now I need to do my grocery shopping for the week. You're welcome to join me if you need to pick up anything. Or you can settle in here. Your choice. Raymond considered for a moment. I'll join you if that's all right. Might as well start learning the routine. The grocery store trip was illuminating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd been shopping at the same store for 20 years, knew the layout by heart, had my list organized by aisle to minimize time and maximize efficiency. Raymond watched with what appeared to be genuine interest as I moved through the store, selecting items with the precision of someone who'd long ago figured out the optimal brands, quantities, and prices for her household needs. You track prices, he observed as I compared two identical products with different price points per unit. Always have, I confirmed, selecting the more cost-effective option. Knowing what things should cost, tracking when prices increase or decrease, understanding the true value of what you're purchasing. Basic financial literacy that most people ignore until it's too late. Most people meaning me? Raymond asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Most people, meaning the vast majority of consumers who make purchasing decisions based on marketing rather than mathematics, I replied. I don't know your shopping habits well enough to comment specifically. At the checkout, I used my rewards card and my carefully selected credit card, the one that gave me 3% back on grocery purchases, and mentally calculated the total before the cashier announced it. I was off by less than $2, close enough to satisfy my need for numerical accuracy. Raymond carried the heavier bags to the car without being asked, which I noted as a point in his favor. Back at the house, as we put away groceries together, Raymond broke the companionable silence we'd settled into. I'm starting to see why Derek might be concerned, he said carefully. I stiffened, preparing for whatever criticism was coming. You're exceptionally competent, Raymond continued. Organized, financially savvy, physically capable. It's probably intimidating to someone who's been assuming he'd eventually need to take care of you. Realizing you don't need taking care of, that you might actually be better at managing money than he is, that's a hard thing for an adult child to accept. Especially a son. We're raised to believe we'll eventually become the protectors, the decision makers. When our mothers refuse to become the helpless elderly women we're expecting, it challenges something fundamental about how we see ourselves. The insight was unexpected and uncomfortably perceptive. Are you speaking from experience? I asked. My mother lived independently until she died at 92, Raymond said, a hint of old pain in his voice. Never needed help, never asked for it, and I spent decades waiting for her to become someone who needed me. She never did. It took me a long time to realize that my discomfort with her independence was my problem, not hers. I'm wondering if Derek's going through something similar. Except Derek's doing more than just feeling uncomfortable, I pointed out. He's actively trying to take away my rights. True, Raymond acknowledged, which suggests either his financial situation is more precarious than it appears, or there's been some triggering event that made him panic about your vulnerability. Or both. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. Vanessa mentioned you had a fall last year. Is that accurate? I felt a flash of anger at this distortion of events. I slipped on ice in a parking lot and caught myself before hitting the ground. I was fine. No injuries, no medical intervention needed. But yes, I mentioned it to Derek during a phone call because it had just happened and I was annoyed about the poorly maintained parking lot. Apparently that's been reframed as evidence of declining stability. That's the problem with family caregiving dynamics, Raymond said thoughtfully. Every normal part of being human, every small mishap or momentary confusion, gets interpreted through the lens of decline once family members start looking for it. Your son probably replays that phone call in his mind and remembers it as you calling him after a fall, scared and hurt, needing help. The reality matters less than the narrative he's constructed. We spent the rest of the afternoon in separate spaces. I worked in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports from my rental properties, and making some portfolio adjustments based on market movements. Raymond settled in the living room with a book, occasionally getting up to explore the house, though I noticed he was careful not to intrude on my office space. It was a reasonable balance, two adults sharing space without requiring constant interaction or entertainment. That evening at dinner, a simple roasted chicken with vegetables that I'd prepared while Raymond read, he made another observation. You cook well. This is restaurant quality. Cooking is chemistry with edible results, I replied. I learned early in my marriage that understanding ratios, temperatures, and timing makes it more science than art. Once you know the principles, it's just replication with minor variations. Your husband was a lucky man, Raymond said, and something in his tone made me look up sharply. Paul was a good partner, I said carefully. We built a life together based on mutual respect and complementary skills. I handled the finances, he handled the home repairs. I managed the investments, he managed the social calendar. It worked well for 41 years until it didn't anymore. Heart attack, Raymond guessed. Stroke, I corrected. Sudden and massive. He was 68, I was 59. No warning, no time to prepare, just gone. I was surprised by my own willingness to share this with a near stranger, but something about Raymond's direct approach made reciprocal honesty feel natural. I'm sorry, he said simply. How long did it take you to adjust? I'm not sure I ever fully adjusted, I admitted. I adapted. I learned to do the things he used to do, hired out the rest. I built a life that worked for me as a single person rather than half of a partnership. But adjusted suggests returning to some kind of equilibrium, and I don't think that's possible after 41 years with someone. You change shape around the loss and keep going. Raymond nodded slowly. My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer, which gave us time to prepare but didn't make it any easier. I still reach for the phone to call her when something interesting happens. Still buy her favorite ice cream at the grocery store sometimes before I remember she's not there to eat it with me. We sat in shared silence for a moment. Two elderly people connected by loss and the strange circumstance that had brought us together. Then Raymond asked, "So what's your plan here? With me, with the conservatorship, with Derek? Because you strike me as someone who always has a plan." My plan was to document my competence so thoroughly that no court would grant the conservatorship, I said. Having you here complicates that. You're either a witness to my capability or evidence of my need for supervision, depending on how you choose to interpret what you observe. Then I guess you'd better make sure there's only one reasonable interpretation, Raymond replied with a slight smile. Lucky for you. I'm actually interested in seeing how a truly financially independent woman in her 70s manages her affairs. I spent 40 years in financial consulting, thought I knew everything about personal finance, but I'm realizing I've never actually observed someone your age operating at this level. It's educational. I'm not a case study, I said, a warning in my voice. No, Raymond agreed. But you are impressive and I'm curious. Humor me. Show me how you do what you do. Worst case, I learned something. Best case, I go back to Vanessa with such glowing reports of your competence that even she has to reconsider this conservatorship nonsense. I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. His expression was open, genuinely interested rather than condescending. It was a risk, letting him into my financial life, but Elena's advice echoed in my mind. Control the narrative. Make competence so undeniable that even hostile witnesses couldn't ignore it. All right, I decided. Tomorrow morning you can observe my routine. Portfolio review, property management check-ins, bill payment, financial planning. If you're going to report back to your daughter, you might as well report accurately about what I actually do rather than what she imagines I'm fumbling through. Fair warning, Raymond said with unexpected humor. I ask a lot of questions. Part of my professional training. If I see something I don't understand, I'm going to want an explanation. I welcome questions from people genuinely seeking to understand, I replied. It's the assumptions without inquiry that I find insulting. The next morning, true to his word, Raymond appeared in my office at 7:30, coffee in hand, notepad at the ready like a student attending an important lecture. I'd already completed my workout and breakfast routine, was showered and dressed, and had my computer open to my portfolio management dashboard. Right now the market is down about 0.5% from Friday's close. I began, pointing to the screen. Most of that is tech sector weakness, which doesn't concern me because I'm underweight tech relative to the broader market. I made that allocation decision 6 months ago when valuations started looking stretched. Raymond leaned in to look at the screen, his expression focused. What's your allocation strategy? How do you decide what to hold? Diversification across sectors, with overweight positions in areas I believe are undervalued and underweight positions in areas that seem overpriced, I explained. I rebalance quarterly unless market movements create opportunities for tactical adjustments. I also maintain 20% in bonds and cash for stability, and to take advantage of market corrections when they occur. That's more sophisticated than most people's strategies, Raymond observed. Where did you learn portfolio management? Books initially, I said. Then trial and error with small amounts of money, gradually building knowledge and confidence. I also took several online courses from MIT and Wharton, auditing rather than pursuing degrees because I was interested in knowledge, not credentials. The advantage of being self-taught is you learn to think independently rather than following conventional wisdom that's often wrong anyway. For the next hour, I walked Raymond through my entire financial routine, reviewing individual stock positions and the reasoning behind holding or selling them, checking dividend payments and reinvestment schedules, analyzing the performance of my rental properties, including occupancy rates, maintenance costs, and net operating income. reconciling credit card statements and categorizing expenses for tax purposes, reviewing upcoming bills and scheduling payments through my bank's online system. Raymond asked intelligent questions throughout, questions that showed genuine understanding rather than performative interest. When did I decide to sell a particular stock? What criteria did I use to evaluate rental property performance? How did I protect against cybersecurity risks when managing everything online? His background in financial consulting was evident in the sophistication of his inquiries. "This is impressive," he said when I finally closed my last application. "You're running what amounts to a small investment firm, plus a property management business, all from your home office. And you do this every day?" "Monday through Friday," I confirmed. "Markets are closed weekends, so I review and plan then but don't make transactions. I probably spend 15 to 20 hours a week on active financial management, another 5 to 10 on property oversight, and various hours on bill paying, tax planning, and general household administration." "And Derek thinks you need oversight for this," Raymond said, shaking his head. "Either he doesn't understand what you're doing, or he understands perfectly and that's why he wants to take control. What's your portfolio worth if you don't mind me asking?" "Just over $2 million in liquid investments," I said, seeing no reason to hide the information from someone who just watched me manage it. "Another $1 million or so in real estate equity when you factor in current market values. And about $400,000 in cash and other assets. Total net worth around $3.5 million, give or take depending on market fluctuations." Raymond whistled low. "And you built this yourself? After your husband died?" "Most of it, yes," I confirmed. "Paul and I had about $800,000 when he died, combination of his life insurance, retirement accounts, and the equity in this house. I took that and turned it into what I have now over 15 years. Not spectacular by investment genius standards, but respectable by ordinary person metrics." "Respectable," Raymond repeated. "That's an interesting word for turning $800,000 into $3.5 million. Most financial professionals would be thrilled with that track record. Most financial professionals charge fees that would have dramatically reduced those returns," I pointed out. "One advantage of managing your own money is keeping the benefits of good decisions, rather than sharing them with advisors who often underperform basic index funds anyway." We spent the rest of the morning talking about investment philosophy, economic trends, and financial literacy. Raymond shared stories from his consulting career. I shared lessons from my self-education journey. And gradually we built something that felt surprisingly like mutual respect between two people who understood money not just as currency, but as tool for building security and independence. At lunch, Raymond made sandwiches while I returned phone calls to my property manager about a tenant issue at one of my rentals. A kitchen sink was leaking and needed replacement. My property manager gave me 2 quotes, one for $400, one for $650. I asked about the difference in materials and warranty, determined the cheaper option would require replacement again within 5 years, while the more expensive one had a 15-year warranty, and approved the higher quote. Basic cost-benefit analysis that took 3 minutes and would save money in the long run. Raymond overheard the call and nodded approvingly when I hung up. "You didn't just take the cheaper quote." "Cheap isn't the same as cost-effective," I replied. I learned that lesson early in property ownership. Sometimes the more expensive option is actually the better value when you factor in longevity and reduced future maintenance. "Derek could learn from that philosophy," Raymond said, and something in his tone made me look at him questioningly. He hesitated, then continued. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Vanessa's been complaining about their finances. They're overextended on the house they bought, carrying credit card debt, and Derek's MBA didn't lead to the salary increases they expected. I think that's part of why they're so focused on your assets. They're not in crisis, but they're not comfortable either, and the prospect of eventually inheriting has become more appealing than they'd probably admit." The information didn't surprise me, but hearing it stated plainly still stung. "So this isn't really about concern for my well-being at all," I said quietly. "It might have started that way," Raymond offered, "but it's gotten tangled up with their financial stress, with their assumptions about what elderly parents should and shouldn't be capable of, with their expectations about their future. People are very good at convincing themselves their self-interest is actually altruism." We were interrupted by the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the flash of concern on Raymond's face suggested he wasn't either. When I opened the door, I found a woman in her early 30s holding a clipboard and wearing an ID badge that identified her as Sarah Mills from Portland Adult Protective Services. "Good afternoon," she said with professional pleasantness. "I'm looking for Diane Hartwell. Are you Mrs. Hartwell?" "I am," I confirmed, my stomach sinking as I recognized what was happening. "Can I help you?" "We received a report of concern about an elderly resident at this address," Sarah explained, glancing at her clipboard. "Just a routine welfare check to make sure everything is all right. May I come in?" I had no legal obligation to let her in without a warrant, but refusing would only make me look like I had something to hide. "Of course," I said, stepping aside, though I'm not sure what concern could have been reported. "I'm perfectly fine." Sarah entered and immediately spotted Raymond standing in the hallway, looking as surprised as I felt. "And you are?" she asked him. "Raymond Castellano," he replied. "I'm a houseguest, staying here temporarily while my retirement community undergoes repairs." Sarah made a note on her clipboard. "I see. Mrs. Hartwell, would it be possible to speak with you privately?" "Anything you need to say can be said in front of Raymond," I replied firmly. "I have nothing to hide." "Very well," Sarah agreed, pulling out a form. The report we received suggested concerns about self-neglect, possible cognitive decline, and unsafe living conditions. "I'm here to assess the situation and determine if any interventions are needed." "Who made this report?" I asked, though I already knew. "Reports can be made anonymously," Sarah said, which was not actually an answer. "I'm sure you understand we take these concerns seriously, especially for elderly residents living alone." "I'm not living alone at the moment," I pointed out, "and I'd like to see this report that contains such dramatic allegations." "I can't share the specific details," Sarah said, "but I can tell you the general areas of concern. The report mentioned you might be experiencing memory problems, having difficulty managing daily activities, and that the home might not be properly maintained." I looked at Raymond, who looked genuinely shocked and, unless I was seriously misreading him, angry on my behalf. This was escalation I hadn't anticipated. Derek and Vanessa weren't just pursuing legal conservatorship, they were trying to establish a paper trail with government agencies that would support their case. "Would you like to tour the house?" I asked Sarah, keeping my voice level despite the fury building inside me. "Assess these supposedly unsafe living conditions for yourself? That would be helpful, thank you," Sarah agreed. I walked her through every room methodically. The spotless kitchen with its organized cabinets and well-stocked pantry. The living room with comfortable furniture and current magazines and books. My home office with its filing systems and computer setup. The upstairs bedrooms, including Raymond's temporary space. The bathrooms, all clean and fully functional. The basement with its workout equipment and storage areas. Sarah made notes throughout, her expression growing more puzzled as the tour progressed. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to say, everything appears to be in excellent order. The home is clean, well-maintained, and there are no safety hazards that I can identify." "That's because there are no safety hazards," I said. "There's also no cognitive decline, no self-neglect, and no need for intervention. This report was filed by someone with an agenda, and I believe I know who." "I can't comment on the source of the report," Sarah repeated. "But I will note in my assessment that the allegations appear to be unfounded based on my observations today. I will also note that you have a house guest, which suggests you're not isolated, and that you were cooperative and oriented during our interaction. I'd like to request a copy of your assessment once it's complete," I said, "for my legal records." "You can submit a request through our office," Sarah confirmed. "Mrs. Hartwell, if you believe this report was filed maliciously, you do have the right to file a complaint." "I'll consider that," I said, though I knew filing a complaint would only create more drama and wouldn't address the underlying problem of my son trying to take control of my life. After Sarah left, Raymond and I stood in the foyer in stunned silence for a moment. Then Raymond spoke, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They called Adult Protective Services on you. They actually weaponized a service meant to help vulnerable elderly people against someone who clearly doesn't need protection. That's unconscionable. That's strategic," I corrected bitterly. If APS had found evidence to support the report, it would have strengthened their conservatorship case. Even though they didn't find anything, the fact that a report was filed creates a paper trail suggesting there were concerns about my welfare. It's all ammunition. I'm calling Vanessa, Raymond said, pulling out his phone. Don't, I stopped him. Not yet. If you call now, angry and accusatory, she'll just get defensive. We need to think strategically about how to use this. Raymond looked at me with something approaching admiration. Even when you're being attacked, you're thinking 3 moves ahead. I learned a long time ago that emotional reactions rarely produce good outcomes, I said. My attorney needs to know about this immediately, but beyond that we wait. Let Derek and Vanessa wonder whether their little APS gambit worked. Let them reveal more of their strategy before we counter. I called Linda Chun and explained what had happened. She was furious, using words I'd rarely heard from her before. This is escalation beyond normal conservatorship proceedings, she said. It suggests either desperation or calculation or both. The good news is that you passed the welfare check with flying colors. The bad news is that they're willing to use any tool available to build their case. We need to be prepared for more of this. More of what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. More attempts to establish a pattern of concern, Linda explained. Maybe reports to your bank about suspicious activity. Maybe calls to your doctor asking questions about your cognitive health. Maybe even attempts to involve your neighbors or friends, asking if they've noticed any changes in you. This is a full court press, Diane. They're committed now. After hanging up with Linda, I found Raymond in the living room, staring out the window with a troubled expression. I owe you an apology, he said without turning around. For what? I asked, genuinely confused. For not taking this seriously enough until now, he replied. I thought this was typical family conflict, adult children being overprotective, maybe some financial opportunism, but nothing truly malicious. But calling APS with false allegations, that crosses a line. They're willing to damage your reputation, to create false narratives about your competence, to weaponize systems meant to protect vulnerable people. That's not overprotective concern. That's calculated attack. So what do we do about it? I asked, settling into the armchair across from where he stood. Raymond turned to face me, and his expression was grim but determined. We make it impossible for them to win. We document everything so thoroughly, demonstrate your competence so overwhelmingly, that no court would dare strip your autonomy. And we make sure that when this is over, there are consequences for what they've tried to do. Consequences, I repeated. What kind of consequences? The kind that make them think twice before trying this again, with you or anyone else, Raymond said. I've spent 3 days with you now, Diane. I've watched you manage a complex financial portfolio, handle property management issues, maintain a household, accommodate an unexpected houseguest, and deal with a spurious APS investigation, all without breaking stride. You're more competent than most people half your age, certainly more competent than my daughter and her husband. The idea that you need a conservator is absurd, and I'm going to make damn sure everyone knows it. I felt something unexpected. Relief certainly at having an ally in this fight, but also something deeper. A recognition that I wasn't alone in this battle anymore. Raymond had arrived as potential adversary, another weapon Derek and Vanessa could use against me. Instead, he'd become something I hadn't expected. A witness, yes, but more than that. A partner in resistance against the infantilization we were both resisting, the assumption that reaching a certain age automatically meant surrendering autonomy. Thank you, I said simply. I appreciate that more than you know. Don't thank me yet, Raymond replied with a slight smile. I'm about to become the world's most inconvenient houseguest. If we're going to fight this properly, we need to create a comprehensive record of your daily competence. That means I'm going to be observing, documenting, and probably asking even more annoying questions than I already do. You up for that? Bring it on, I said, feeling something that might have been hope for the first time since receiving that conservatorship letter. Let's show them exactly what they're up against. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks after the APS visit. During that time, Raymond and I built what Linda called the most comprehensive defense she'd ever seen in a conservatorship case. Every morning, Raymond documented my portfolio management decisions with timestamps and rationale. Every transaction was photographed and explained. Every property management call was recorded with my consent. Every workout session, every grocery trip, every social engagement was logged with meticulous detail. But something else was happening too. Something neither of us had anticipated. We were becoming genuine friends. Our morning coffee conversations evolved from stiff politeness to easy exchanges about market trends, political developments, books we were reading. Raymond started joining me for grocery shopping not as observer but as companion, offering opinions on produce selection, and debating the merits of different coffee brands. We cooked together in the evenings, his Italian recipes meeting my precise measurements, creating meals that were better than either of us made alone. Derek called twice during those weeks. The first time I let it go to voicemail. The second time I answered and kept my voice neutral as he asked how things were going with Raymond. Fine, I said simply. We're managing well together. I didn't elaborate, didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing we'd formed an alliance. Let him wonder what his spy was reporting. Linda built our case methodically. Medical records showing no cognitive decline. Financial statements demonstrating consistent, competent management. Property records showing well-maintained assets generating solid returns. Character references from my financial literacy students, my gym trainer, my longtime friends, and Raymond's detailed daily logs, which painted a picture of someone not just competent but exceptional in her independence. The day before the hearing, Raymond received a call from Vanessa. I was in my office when I heard his voice rising in the living room, anger breaking through his usual measured tone. When he appeared in my doorway 15 minutes later, his face was flushed. She wanted me to testify against you, he said without preamble. Said it was my responsibility to protect you from yourself, that family loyalty meant supporting Derek's petition. When I told her I'd be testifying on your behalf instead, she accused me of being manipulated by you, said you'd somehow influenced me against my own daughter. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. I never intended to come between you and Vanessa. You didn't, Raymond said firmly. She did, when she asked me to lie about what I've observed. I've watched you for 3 weeks, Diane. I've seen how you operate, how sharp you are, how completely in control of your life and finances. The idea that you need someone else making decisions for you is ludicrous, and I won't pretend otherwise, not even for my daughter. The hearing itself was held in a small courtroom that smelled of old wood and resignation. Derek and Vanessa sat on one side with their attorney, a polished woman in her 40s who radiated expensive competence. Linda and I sat on the other side with Raymond positioned behind us, ready to testify. Derek's attorney presented their case first. The fall I'd mentioned last year, now characterized as a serious incident that demonstrated declining physical stability. My choice to live alone, presented as isolation and lack of support system. My independent financial management, reframed as risky behavior without professional oversight. The APS report, cited as evidence of community concern despite its findings of no issues. They painted a picture of a vulnerable elderly woman who didn't realize she needed help, who was one bad decision away from disaster. Then Linda presented our defense. My clean bill of health from comprehensive medical and cognitive assessments. My portfolio returns exceeding professional benchmarks. My property management records showing consistent, competent decisions. Testimony from my financial literacy students about my sharp analytical skills. And finally, Raymond. He took the stand with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades in professional settings, and his testimony was devastating to Derek's case. He described in precise detail my daily routines, my financial acumen, my physical capability, my social engagement. He explained how he'd arrived expecting to find someone who needed supervision, and instead found someone more competent than most people decades younger. He spoke about the APS visit and how the investigator had found no concerns whatsoever. And then he dropped the bomb we'd been saving. I was asked by my daughter to document evidence of Mrs. Hartwell's incompetence, Raymond said calmly. I was told she would likely be confused, forgetful, and struggling to manage basic tasks. After 3 weeks of careful observation, I can state unequivocally that those characterizations are not just inaccurate, they're deliberately false. Mrs. Hartwell is one of the most financially sophisticated individuals I've encountered in 40 years of professional consulting. This conservatorship petition appears to be motivated not by genuine concern but by financial opportunism. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense, asked Derek directly about his financial situation. Under oath, he admitted to the credit card debt, the overextended mortgage, the salary that hadn't met expectations. When asked if he stood to benefit financially from controlling his mother's assets, he couldn't deny it convincingly. The ruling came swiftly. Petition denied. The judge stated for the record that Mrs. Diane Hartwell had demonstrated exceptional competence in managing her affairs, that no credible evidence of incapacity had been presented, and that the petition appeared to be motivated by factors other than genuine concern for the proposed conservatee's welfare. She went further, warning Derek that filing frivolous conservatorship petitions could result in sanctions, and that any future attempts to strip his mother's autonomy would be viewed with extreme skepticism. Outside the courthouse, Derek and Vanessa left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Raymond squeezed my shoulder gently. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," I corrected. "I couldn't have won without your testimony." Linda joined us, grinning with satisfaction. "That was one of the most clear-cut denials I've seen. The judge was not impressed with your son's motivations." As we walked to the parking lot, Raymond cleared his throat. "So, my retirement community called. The repairs are finished. I can move back any time." I felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "I see. When were you thinking?" "That depends," Raymond said slowly. "I've been thinking about those 3 bedrooms you have. You use one, I just used another one for 3 weeks, and the third is your office. But you mentioned once that you did your financial work at the kitchen desk before converting that bedroom to an office." "I did," I confirmed, not sure where he was going. "What if," Raymond continued carefully, "we made this arrangement more permanent? Not as landlord and tenant but as housemates. 2 competent adults sharing space, expenses, and occasionally dinner conversation. I'd pay fair market rent for the room and half the utilities. You'd maintain control of your house and your finances. We'd both have companionship without sacrificing independence." I stared at him, processing the suggestion. It was practical, financially sensible, and personally appealing in ways I hadn't expected. "Your daughter would think you'd been completely manipulated." "My daughter needs to learn that her assumptions about what elderly parents need aren't universal truth," Raymond replied. "Besides, the irony is perfect. She tried to push us together to solve her problems, and we're choosing to stay together to solve ours. Separate finances, separate lives, just shared space," I clarified. "Exactly," Raymond agreed. "Think of it as a very civilized Golden Girls situation, but with better financial planning and fewer cheesecakes." I laughed, surprising myself. "All right, let's try it. 6-month trial period. Either of us can end it with 30 days notice if it's not working." "Deal." Raymond extended his hand formally, and I shook it, sealing an arrangement that would have scandalized Derek and Vanessa while actually being the most sensible housing solution either of us could have designed. 6 months later, the arrangement was working better than either of us had anticipated. Raymond had moved his belongings improperly, converted the guest room into his personal space, and we'd settled into a rhythm that honored both independence and companionship. We maintained separate bank accounts, split household expenses precisely down the middle, and generally operated as 2 autonomous adults who happened to enjoy living under the same roof. Derek and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship, though it would never be what it was. Some betrayals leave permanent marks. But we spoke occasionally, carefully avoiding topics of finance or autonomy, focusing instead on safer ground like his children's school activities and general family news. Vanessa kept her distance and I didn't push. Some relationships weren't meant to be repaired. The conservatorship attempt had cost Derek and Vanessa significantly. Legal fees they couldn't afford. Damage to their reputation in my social circle. And most importantly, the clear understanding that any future attempts to control my life would be met with fierce, well-documented resistance. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after that certified letter had arrived, I stood in my home gym completing my bench press routine while Raymond made breakfast. The bar was loaded with 175 pounds now, 10 pounds more than when this had all started. I pushed through my final rep, feeling strong and capable and thoroughly defiantly alive. Protein shake or omelet? Raymond called from the kitchen. Both, I called back. I earned them. As I racked the weight and caught my breath, I thought about the irony of it all. Derek and Vanessa had tried to prove I was too frail to manage my own life. Instead, they pushed me into an arrangement that made me more secure, more supported, and more determined than ever to live life on my own terms. They tried to take away my autonomy and ended up strengthening it. I was 75 now, still managing my portfolio with returns that made financial advisors envious, still maintaining rental properties that generated steady income, still working out 3 times a week with weights that would surprise anyone who assumed age meant weakness. And I was doing it all while sharing my home with a man who understood that independence and companionship weren't mutually exclusive, that respect for autonomy was the foundation of any successful relationship, and that growing old didn't mean surrendering control of your life to anyone who decided they knew better. They'd called me too frail to live alone. They'd been wrong about the frail part. And now I wasn't alone anymore, but on my terms, my choice, my life. Exactly as it should be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out,